we're going to do today is we're going to continue with our fire school series. We're going to talk about furthering our knowledge on what it takes to make a proper bow and drill fire. Yesterday we went over the components of the bow drill fire. We went over how to harvest those components and create those components. And then we took that to creating a coal or an ember. Once we have that coal or ember, we have to understand what to do with that. That requires us to have a good bird's nest. And there's a difference between a bird's nest and a tinder bundle. A tinder bundle is something you use at the base of your fire to effect ignition from something like a ferrocerium rod, a lighter, a match, something that has flame or very, very hot sparks that's highly combustible that will rise that heat and flame into your kindling and your fuel or your fire lay almost immediately. A bird's nest, on the other hand, is something that you use with an ember to effect ignition, and you have to blow that flame into life by heating that bundle up and to the point of ignition using the ember that you've created from a bow drill, from char cloth, from solar magnification, or something along those lines. And today, what we're going to talk about is how we create that bird nest of material. If we can find an open area similar to where I'm at right now with lots of dead weeds, it's in the early spring or fall or the winter time, it's very easy for us to collect handfuls of dried material that are good possibilities for bird nest construction. But what we need to remember about any material that we collect, again, going back to what I said before about properties of the material. It has to be dry, it has to be highly combustible, but it also has to have a long burning capability. When you talk about dried grasses, dried leaves, and things of that nature, they burn up very quickly. They're highly combustible, but they aren't long lasting. There's not a whole lot of substance to a piece of dead grass or a piece of a dead weed that's going to hold flame for a long period of time. It's going to catch fire, burn up, and be gone. Now, if you understand your fire lay and you have the correct materials in that fire lay, you can absolutely get away with a more marginal bird nest. And when I say marginal, I mean something that's going to burn up fairly quickly, or something that's a little bit too small, or something that might even be a little bit damp. All of those things are variables that you have to control. They're all inputs that affect the output of your final fire, the sustainability of that fire. Building a fire is really not the hardest part of fire making. Creating a sustainable fire is the hard part, something that you can walk away from without worry of that fire going out. That's the difficult thing to understand. Building the proper bird's nest and the proper fire lay, or the proper tinder bundle or stick bundle, and we'll talk about all of those things, are very important inputs into the output of that sustainable fire. So we could collect up as much of this stuff as we can as dry, and we could make this thing the size of a softball or a basketball, and it would burn for a little while, but it's not optimal. What we really want is we want something that's got a little more substance to it, like a bark, an inner bark from a tree that has those same stringy, lots of surface area properties that this grass has. And you can see there's lots and lots of surface area here, and that's important. But there's also a lot of coarse material in here, and that's not so good. We need fine material, medium material, and coarse material. This would be something I would consider coarse material. We're going to need fine material to put with this. There's nothing wrong with putting grass in your bird's nest as long as you have other material with the grass. But grass alone will burn up very, very quickly. Okay, in this thicket we have a lot of vines. And these vines have an outer bark that is peeling off of them. You can see it right here. And this bark is going to give you better burnability than straight grass because it is a bark. It's an outer bark, but it's a very thin outer bark. And again, we don't care what species this plant is. All we care about are the properties that this plant possesses. The properties are an outer bark that peels off in shreds and is going to give us something a little bit more robust than a straight grass to add into our tinder bundle. The hardest thing for me to get across to my students, or maybe the hardest thing for most people to grasp, is that we don't care what this plant is. We care about the properties of this plant. That's what's important. And with this plant having the property of an outer bark that peels off very good, is combustible, is very thin, and can be shredded very small, I can take this and process it down and give it lots and lots of fine fibers and lots of surface area to catch fire when I put my ember inside here. So mixing this with the grass and with other inner barks of trees is okay. A a bird nest made up of simply this material alone would not be near as effective as something that was mixed with an inner bark, which burns longer yet. So we have grass and leaves, outer barks, and inner barks. Those are the things that we need to look at when we're building a bird's nest. Yesterday we peeled all this bark off of the outside of the tulip poplar. I'm going to grab one over here, a piece of it that's dead, and you can see that that bark peels off fairly readily. We don't want the outer bark, we want the inner bark. The outer bark is this colored stuff that's black here, and the inner bark is the fine inner fibers. And if we take this and twist it, that outer bark will fall off. And what we'll be left with is the fuzzy stuff on the inside that looks like this. And this is what we're after. This stuff is highly combustible, but it's also a more dense material, so it's going to have longer burnability. So we would take large pieces of this bark or large sections of this bark, and we would begin to process it down and get the outer bark off of it. And we can do that anywhere. And we're just going to let the outer bark fall down. I like to collect a lot of this stuff because it's really highly combustible, to put sometimes in the center of my bird nest where I want my highest combustible material. And I'll start to shred this off, and as I shred this up, again, that outer bark is going to fall off onto the stump or onto my poncho or onto my blanket or whatever I'm using to process this material on. It's going to fall off onto that. Again, this is something that's going to take some time. This is not something you're going to do in 2 minutes or 3 minutes. It's going to take time. You need to break all of this bark down to the finest fibers that you can get. Once you've done that, you won't have any outer bark left on there because it will all have fallen off anyway. Again, preparation of that material is the key to your success. It doesn't hurt to have a little bit of this heavier stuff on the outside of your tinder bundle, or excuse me, it doesn't hurt to have some of this stuff on the outside of your bird nest, but the inside of your bird nest really needs to be the finest material that you can get with the most surface area to heat up the fastest. The smaller the material is, the faster it will combust because the faster it's going to heat up. It's just like a toothpick and a telephone pole. If you hold a cigarette lighter over a toothpick and a telephone pole, which one do you think is going to catch fire faster? The toothpick. It has less surface area for the flames to have to heat up, and it is going to heat up the fastest. That's why when you set up your fire lay, your kindling should always be needle size to pencil lead size stuff, because it's going to catch fire quickly. And that's what we want with our bird's nest. We want something that's going to catch fire very quickly because we're going to have a limited ember inside this bird nest to affect our ignition. This is kind of what I'm looking for on the scale of a softball. It's something broken down to at least this fine of fibers or better. And we're looking for something, like I said, the size of a softball or a baseball. Again, that depends really on how marginal the rest of your material for your fire lay is and what your confidence level is. The bigger this bird's nest is, the longer you're going to have to fuss with that fire lay and affect your sustainable fire. The smaller it is, the less time you have. If you've got highly combustible, dry kindling, really snappy, good wood that's lightweight, burns fast like a tulip poplar or a willow or something like that, or some cedar that's been cut down or broken down into, you know, needle size, pencil lead size stuff, it's going to catch fire really quickly, and you might not have to have as big of a bird nest. If you've got marginal or wet material or hardwoods, you're going to want a bigger bird nest because you're going to need longer flame to get that going. So you just got to sit and process this and process this and process this until all of it gets down to what you want. And then you arrange it into your bird nest of material to place your ember in. So after I've processed my material, I have the vine bark. I've processed down some tulip poplar bark. And I also have a pile of dead grass. So I'll take this dead grass, I'll put it right here, knowing that it's going to be highly combustible. I'll take some of that vine bark and put it in here, just like this. And then I'm going to take my processed poplar bark and I'm going to put it in the center, like this. And I'm going to waller that out a little bit, so I've got a place in here that a bird would lay an egg. That's what I'm looking for. Then I'm going to take the last bit of this tulip poplar bark and I'm really going to process some of this down really fine. When I get that processed down as fine as I can, I'm going to use that as the center of my bird nest, right where my egg is going to go. And in this case, the egg is our ember from our bow drill. Remember that you need coarse, medium, and fine materials. It's not hurting anything to have some bark in here on the back side of this. It's not hurting anything to have some grass that we know is going to burn fairly fast, but we know it's highly combustible. It's not going to hurt anything to have some of them bark in there from vines and things like that. Even water vine, grapevine bark won't hurt you, but you don't want it in the center of your bundle. Because what we want to do is we want to gather this up and get our nest with our finest fibers in the center, and we want to set our ember in our bird nest, and then we want to blow it to flame up. And once it flames up, we really want to turn it over on itself. So we already know that this stuff's going to burn up very quickly and give us quick hot flame, and the center part is going to take longer to burn, and that's okay because it's on the bottom, and we need that longevity for our fire lay. So this is what I would call a fairly proper bird's nest if I've got pretty good material that I'm working with. And you can see it's much bigger than my fist. It's about the size of a softball when I'm done. That's what I'd want to start off with if I had pretty good material to work with to make my fire. Once we have created our bird nest, we want to keep that dry as well. So we want to keep that off the ground, set it off to the side on whatever we're using for a ground mat, whether that be our space blanket, our wool blanket, whatever the case may be. Now, knowing that we've got to take a second bite at the apple per se with our bow drill set because we did not use our ember yesterday to ignite a bird nest, we're going to use the same set today, but we have to make a couple of adjustments really quick. We need to knock the charred portion of our spindle off here, which I've done with just my knife, and that just means that I've went around and faceted my spindle again on the bottom side and knocked the charred material off. I don't want this to be too hard, so if I knock that charred material off, I'm knocking the hardness right at the tip of my spindle off. Then I've got to go up here again, cut my angle in to make sure that I'm not going to shoulder out, because if I shoulder out into my handhold or my socket, again, like we talked about yesterday, all I'm doing is creating friction in the top when I want all that friction to be in the bottom. But I don't want to remove all of that charred material because as it chars, it gets hard. And we want that hardness there. We'll check our bearing block and make sure our hole hasn't gotten too big or expanded too much so that we're not shouldering out here. And if you start to hear squeak and things like that, generally it's coming from here. If it starts to get hard to push your bow drill back and forth or push your bow back and forth, generally it's because you're binding here. That's the first thing you want to look at. If I'm worried about that, I can grease this up a little bit with something. I can use grease out of my nose, out of my backside. I can use grease from anywhere I need to. I can use fixing wax. I can use a green plant or some green grass, and I can take some green grass and shove it in there, just like that. And that will help to lubricate that hole, make it spin a little easier. So if I just pack that with grass, get any residuals off there, that will help. Again, if you're using a green piece of wood to begin with, that will help alleviate a lot of that, because it will tend to polish and make it run better anyway. We've got our piece of wood here. We've got a piece of bark to catch our ember on. Always putting our knife away when we're done using it so that we're safe. Our bow should not have loosened up too bad. We only used it the one time. It's still actually tight enough that I have to work it to get it back in that 7 notch. So it's still pretty tight. We shouldn't have to mess with that. Now we're ready to set ourselves up again to try to make an ember. So we'll put something to catch our ember right underneath our V-notch. If we have to clean our V-notch out at all, it should be just to clean off a little bit of a ramp right there inside our burned hole, so that we don't get below the V-notch with our spindle and we don't have anywhere for the coal to spill over. So if we need to do anything, we're just going to dress that up, and I've already done that. Always we're going to use something on top of our fireboard so that we're not putting our foot directly on our fireboard. Any moisture from the ground that's in your foot is going to transfer into that board. And if you have to go down the board for another hole or use this bow drill set again later, you're not going to have a dry board. So you want to protect that. We'll go ahead and get our spindle loaded. I try to keep my spindle, like I said, I try to keep my spindle in the middle. As far as where the string rides on the spindle, I like it to ride in the middle if that's possible. And sometimes you just have to rotate this thing around a little bit to get it there. But I like it to start off pretty well centered if I can get it there. The one thing that you have to do, that you have to understand with a bow drill fire, is that downward pressure, initial downward pressure and form is the key. It's not speed. The speed doesn't matter until the very end. Slow, steady strokes that are producing smoke and causing material to be spilled over into this notch are what you want. When you look down here and you see that that notch is full, you can then speed your stroke up to create more heat. But heat without anything to ignite is a waste of energy. So going like a bat out of hell after this thing right off the bat is just a waste of your energy. You want to make sure that you have material in there to turn into a coal to affect ignition before you mess with any of that. So again, we're going to start off pretty slow and just make sure that we're riding in here good, that we've got the correct amount of downward pressure. And we're just going to go slow and easy. We've already got smoke. All right, so once we have our ember, we've got time. We can let this thing grow. We don't have to get in a big hurry. We want our tinder bundle as close to the ember as possible when we transfer it over. We do not want to have to carry that ember any further than necessary. Once it starts to turn red on the top, we can then pick up this and set it right here and transfer that ember into our tinder bundle. Okay, once I have transferred my ember, I'm going to kind of sandwich it in a little bit like this. I'm going to get it up above my face so that the heat is rising through the bundle. I'm not blowing really hard. I'm gently blowing. That ember's only going to last so long, and it has to heat that surrounding material up to combustibility. Now once I start to see a lot of smoke coming out of this bundle, and there's a large area inside there that's red, I'm going to get after it. And you can see that thing combusted in my hand, and now all I'm going to do is turn it over on itself, just like this, and put it into my fire lay. And this stuff on top is going to burn fast, but the stuff below is going to burn for a little while and give me that time for combustion of any marginal material. You know, I told you guys last week about audible.com/wilderness. I get a lot of the books that I do research and reading on from that site. I'm getting ready to fly to Holland to shoot a commercial next week, and I'm going to be listening to Audible books the whole time. And I've got a book that I'm reading right now called A Patriot's History of the United States. And it's a very good book. It's about 50 hours long. It's by Larry Swikart and Michael Allen. I suggest you pick up a copy of that from audible.com. Check it out for yourself. So far, I'm really enjoying it. I've got lots of time to listen to it over the next week. I plan on finishing the book on my trip to Holland. I'm Dave Canterbury with the Pathfinder School. I thank you for joining me out here today for another video. I thank you for all that you do for our school, for our family, for our business, for our friends, affiliates, sponsors, all of my instructors. I'll be back with another video as soon as I can in this series, guys. Thanks.